All right, we will get started here. As I said earlier, for those who weren't in, if you have questions, feel free to submit them now or during the call. At the end of Chase's presentation, we'll go through and we'll answer your questions as they come up. So with that, this webinar is about explaining the USDA Hemp Regulations. We're going to have a Q&A section after the first 15 minutes. With us today, we have Chase Hubbard, our Senior Analyst on hemp. Chase, would you like to go ahead and take the presentation from here?
I would. Thank you very much, George, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I know some of you have probably done similar sessions on the USDA's IFR interim final rule. So we'll go over these rules briefly and then talk about the impact on markets in particular. So for many months leading up to the release of these regulations, the interim final rule at the end of October, this was seen as a major piece needed for normalization in the new industry. And after the release, many of it was lauded. Many of the regulations were lauded. Some of them, posed some challenges to the industry, and we'll get to that as we go along here. The major portion of the regulations are related to THC. No surprise after hemp and cannabis being illegal for so many years. But I'll go right through it, starting with the sampling and the pre-harvest window, the laboratories, and then the impact on markets. So from a sampling standpoint, now the USDA specifies that only law enforcement or state representatives can do, state or tribal employees can do sampling in hemp crops. Unsure what this is going to look like next year. These people have to be trained and certified by the USDA. And I think states are all sort of scratching their heads right now to see what personnel they have available to do that. In some states, this may be extension personnel. In some areas, it may actually be law enforcement. They have to undergo the training. And the owner or an agent of the owner has to be present for the sampling. The sampling is specified, has to include the top third of the plant. This is not particularly specific, so there is some room for interpretation there from samplers. It does have implications, though. The top third of the plant is typically the highest in cannabinoids, so this does present some challenges. We know that Colorado currently doesn't do sampling on 100% of their hemp crops. They have personnel to sample about 25% of their crop currently. So that's just an example of one of the larger states with one of the larger, more mature industries and what that picture looks like. The pre-harvest window, sampling, and so with the sampling also have to maintain chain of custody for samples and going to the labs. The pre-harvest window specifies that sampling has to occur within 15 days of harvest. This also has some implications because it's already challenging enough to grow a crop. So one loses flexibility in their harvest in that they have to harvest their crop within 50 days of that harvest. The thought being that cannabinoids and THC can continue to increase after that point. And so they can increase if you delay your harvest. And harvest can begin before you get your results, but you are flying blind as a farmer there without results. For many farmers, they have testing in-house. They have HPLC, liquid chromatography machines to do their own testing. Others will only use the state certified or the USDA certified sampling as their measurement for their crop. And this will be a challenge in terms of logistics for harvesting. So then to the laboratory. This is one of the more contentious points. And the laboratories must be DEA registered. And I'm going to pull up. So this is the basic hemp site for the USDA. And within it, there's a number of things in here. And one of the things that they've recently added is the hemp analytical testing laboratories. So there are 31 laboratories that are DEA registered, and you can access that list on the USDA's website. But this is a major issue and creates the potential for a bottleneck. as all the sampling is done in a very narrow window during harvest time. So the DEA registration for laboratories is also an issue. Current labs that are doing this testing that also test cannabis or marijuana will not be able to do this because technically cannabis or marijuana is federally illegal. So their testing activities already are technically illegal. So they will not be able to get the DEA registration as we currently understand it. The process used for the testing has to be a post-decarboxylation test. This is after a heating process, which will convert the acid form of THC, THCA into delta-9 THC. So this is also a new standard. States have been doing this in different ways, but the post-decarboxylated THC, total THC content cannot exceed 0.3%. States like Tennessee, for instance, and other states have been using a delta-9 standard, which does not include the acid form of THC, nor does, and also other states have been rounding. So many states have been allowing THC contents up to 0.39%. This will no longer be allowed. This is a huge issue in THC contents. As you see this graph here, this shows a representation of CBD and THC content in several hundred samples from a laboratory. This is thanks to Rod Kite, Kite on Cannabis website and blog. Thank you very much, Rod. But this shows you, so 0.3%, this is the total, this is the threshold for compliance. And you can see the number of samples that vastly exceed this threshold. So there are thoughts that much of the crop next year will be non-compliant, and we'll discuss this as we go on further. There are some outliers, but overall, this is a very good visual on distribution of THC and CBD content. Also, you can see that at this threshold, most of the CBD content is well below 10%. Typically in industry right now, 10% is the desirable threshold for extractors for efficiency. They're looking for material that's above 10%. So this is going to decrease efficiency for them and create some challenges for established business practices on the extractor level. Again, you can access this at the Kite on Cannabis site. Bring that up just briefly here.
And Chase, I can include some of these links in the email that we'll send out to everybody afterward.
Excellent, thank you. This is a great site. Recommend that you work with an attorney on any of these issues that are pressing for your business. The other thing that they added is a measurement of uncertainty. This is similar to a margin of error. So that if a lab establishes a measurement of uncertainty of 0.3 or 0.03, then a THC measurement of 0.33 would be compliant because the measurement of uncertainty, the margin of error, brings that below the 0.3 threshold. Not a lot of wiggle room, but they do give some room there for a margin of error. They've also established a safe harbor for anything that tests under 0.5%, so 0.5% or lower. Will not, there'll be no legal ramifications. They have said that that if in 3 times over 5 years you exceed the THC levels, you can be banned from growing for 5 years. So that's also new. Labs are encouraged to have 17025 ISO certification, but not required. And the USDA has also talked about a laboratory accreditation process. Currently, they do not do that. And again, I mentioned that labs that are currently testing high THC cannabis will not be able to get the DEA registration. That 0.3%, although is seen as arbitrary for the THC level, this is something that can't change, and the USDA does not have the power to do that. This is established by Congress in the 2018 Farm Bill, so only Congress can change this. So these are the major points in the bill, the THC contents. And what we see for potential impacts in the markets is a scenario where we may have a shortage of compliant hemp in the coming year. This will probably drive demand to some extent, regardless of the actual picture of supply. The idea of this shutting down supply by half or more could have a major impact on prices. The graph that I showed of THC distribution gives you an idea of what this could look like from a market standpoint. If this is the total supply of 2019 and this is reduced for 2020, then this is a very big change.
You're looking almost like a third of that would qualify.
Correct.
So 2/3 would be disqualified.
That's correct. As we currently understand it, that could be the implication there. We also expect more CBG genetics. Cannabigerol genetics or CBG genetics were grown more popularly this year, several thousand acres. CBG hemp is much lower in THC, and CBG as a cannabinoid is seen as the stem cell of cannabinoids. So from it can arise CBD. In discussion with the seed companies, it does appear that they do have an increased supply of CBD genetics for 2020, but that is going to be limited. So if you do plan on growing CBD genetics, recommend that you secure your seed directly. Immediate implications or immediate effects for banking. Just last week, we saw guidance from federal banking agencies to encourage them to do business with hemp producers, clarifying that hemp is a legal crop and that they should not have reservations and are not required to adhere to the Banking Secrecy Act as it pertains to hemp. However, it does place a great deal of responsibility on banks to understand the regulations because they still required to report on any suspicious activities for illegal crops, which is marijuana, which the difference is very, very narrow between 0.3% and 0.31%. But it does appear to have stimulated some action in banking. Transportation is another area that we've seen immediate impacts. Idaho, many are familiar with the event in Idaho where a trucker was arrested, and Idaho has drawn a pretty strict line on transport. But we do see immediate action from Idaho. So we can see here the Governor Brad Little of the state of Idaho. So any transporter of hemp shall have to stop and check in with the state. But essentially, this document from the governor of the state of Idaho says that with proper documentation and hemp that's grown under the 2014 or 2018 Farm Bill is allowed to pass through the state of Idaho. This is a big deal. This trucker was arrested with a felony charge of distribution. He was looking at years of incarceration. So this is a major impact on the industry. The other thing we see is a potential for fragmentation in the industry. States like Colorado and Oregon with legal high THC cannabis programs could likely be more lenient in the enforcement of these rules. That and there's also options for remediation. Even though there is a seed to sell tracking component to states like Oregon, it's still possible for this material to enter the supply chain and an option for selling it. But also this non-compliant hemp, because Colorado has so much extraction capacity. Any hemp that's say 0.35 or 0.4% THC could easily make its way to an extractor and fly under the radar. This could be a major advantage for states like Colorado. It does preclude interstate commerce. But again, it's not established how these things are tested, where much of it creates risk for operators. But wherever you enter in the state does not mean that your hemp will be tested immediately. So those are some of the major impacts that we see on markets for the new IFR interim final rule by the USDA. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
All right, Chase. Well, the first question I have here is, will the USDA be certifying seed?
That's a good question. The USDA will not be certifying seed. The reason is because one seed certified for a particular environment could go hot in another environment. They don't have the confidence to certify seed in that it will universally produce compliant hemp. So no, the USDA will not be venturing into seed certification at this point.
Okay. A few more questions we have here. Any ideas yet of which states will control their own program instead of allowing the USDA to oversee?
That's another good question. The USDA stipulates that states can create their own regulations, and these also have to be approved by the USDA. Once submitted by the state, they have 60 days to approve these plans. The plans can be more stringent than the USDA's IFR, but they cannot be more lenient. So any state's official plan will have to adhere to the USDA guidelines, as I mentioned. But because there's a lot of gray area here, and it creates a lot of opportunity for states like Colorado to allow hemp that is slightly over the limit to enter commerce.
Okay.
Whether this actually happens or not is unknown, but many believe that this is a real possibility.
What do you see the regulatory burden doing the cost/profitability of the industry?
Another very good question. Well, just starting from a sampling standpoint, or from a genetic standpoint too, there's already a lack of genetics out there that are compliant. Although less than 10% of the crop, much less than 10% of the crop was hot this year, it still is a challenge to find compliant genetics. And CBG is certainly seen as an answer to this. But the cost for seed breeders who have developed to one standard, from that aspect, that's a major challenge. And some of these companies are heavily invested in developing. It is a lucrative ancillary industry, seed genetics, but that could have a major impact from a producer standpoint. First of all, the sampling, the cost of the sampling, what that's going to look like in a state. The USDA does not establish this, so it'll be state budgets that really dictate what the cost is for sampling. And then the laboratories, less laboratory choices, this could increase cost. It certainly creates a major bottleneck for and some real challenges from a practical standpoint for producers. Farming is challenging enough as it is. To try to hit these narrow windows is going to be really challenging. Only the very best managers are going to be able to hit that mark regularly. And from a laboratory standpoint, many of the laboratories are having to shift and change their procedures, add new staff for overhead in record keeping and SOP development. So overall, this does add a great deal of cost throughout the entire industry. Exactly how much, we don't know. The 2020 season will reveal a lot from that respect.
Okay. And one of the last questions we have here, will an online database be available for the public to search who has been granted a hemp permit by the USDA and by their state?
Now, that is a very good question. I'm unsure if the USDA plans to provide a database. I do know that one of the good outcomes of the IFR is that producers will have to report to FSA, Farm Service Agency. Certainly from an analyst standpoint, many that would like to know total acreage grown during a given year, this is a plus. So FSA will have a record of all the producers, have geospatial coordinates for every producer. So the information will be there. Whether the USDA will make this public, I don't know. Currently, state by state, some states make it public, others don't. But what that looks like going forward, I do not know.
Okay. What is your guess about what can happen if the limited number of testing facilities will not be able to handle the amount of testing needed?
That is a good question. Whether the USDA offers any kind of reprieve here and allows some of the other laboratories an interim certification or some kind of allowance here, because this could be a major issue. And if it's left to be handled during the busy harvest time, this could have major impacts for producers, for everyone in the industry. And for producers that have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars invested, it's important for these things to be worked out. And hopefully the USDA will create some kind of contingency if the current list of labs is overwhelmed.
Okay. This question I'm going to combine into one question here. What do you think of the reporting requirement of hot results to the DEA, and do you think that will limit the testing being performed?
Right. So it's unclear why the DEA has been involved at this point with illegal crop, but the reason is because of the fine line between hemp and marijuana, high THC marijuana. The reporting is required. The DEA, the scope of the DEA really starts when a product exceeds the 0.3% threshold, and so it's unclear what the result of that'll be, but or what the actual role of the DEA will be in this. But they have inserted themselves into the program.
If you were to speculate, what do you think is going to happen there?
I think that the DEA is going to have a minor role here. I know that there's a lot of interagency play going on, but I think that they're still sorting it out. Part of the reason that we don't know some of these things is that they don't. Departments of Agriculture in particular don't have a history of working with the DEA. That's a very new relationship. So there's a lot of unclarity there, and unsure what's going to happen. But specifically, these DEA registered labs are already DEA registered, so their reporting to the DEA is probably not going to be a major issue.
Okay.
Destruction of non-compliant crops is going to be a cost. That, by the way, is at the owner's cost, burning the crop.
If the USDA interim rules are accepted, when will they take effect, and what rules will be operating under for the 2020 harvest?
So most states, if they are approved by the USDA, will be operating under this IFR starting next growing season, and expires 2 years after the rules were issued. So that would be November of 2021. I'm sorry, what's that question again?
Yeah, repeat again.
The timing of the rule. Sorry, I got it.
What rules will be operating under?
So one of the things that is interesting is that states that do not rush to file a plan with the USDA can continue to operate under the 2014 rules. I believe that this is possible for the 2020 season. So it is possible on a state level that growers can continue operating under the existing rules for another season.
Okay. Well, Chase, you successfully got through all the questions that we have here. Thanks for taking the time to chat with the attendees on the webinar. If anyone has additional questions, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, please use the email if you're a subscriber or you receive the bulletin via email, chase.hubbard@thejacobson.com. Reach out to me if I didn't answer a question satisfactorily, or if you would you have other things you'd like to discuss, please send me an email.
Okay, and I'll send out a recording of the webinar to everybody along with Chase's links so you have them. And thank you all for joining, and have a great holiday.